November 22nd is the 50th anniversary of the death of the great C.S. Lewis. Now, if you're like me, you love Lewis. You can't get enough of him. And you love all the conversation surrounding this anniversary. But maybe you're one of those people that I've met and talked to who just really don't get Lewis. Maybe you try to jump into Mere Christianity or tried to jump into one of his nonfiction books and you found it just a little bit dense and maybe a little bit heady, and you just don't understand what all the hype is about. Well, before you give up on Lewis, I would suggest go to Narnia. One of the things that Lewis was really good at, as Michael Ward pointed out in a recent Christianity Today article, is going back and forth between the didactic and the imaginative, between the rhetorical and the reasonable. He could appeal to both the head and to the heart. So for example, if you didn't get Mere Christianity, go to The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You'll see where so many of the themes that Lewis develops in Mere Christianity is fleshed out in the world and the storyline of that book. But let me tell you about my favorite. I love Lewis's nonfiction work, The Abolition of Man. I think it's one of those rare books that's more true today than it was when he wrote it. The first article in particular is one that I think is extremely profound, and that's the article, Men Without Chest. Because he said it filled kids' heads with knowledge and their bellies with passion, but it did nothing to cultivate the chest. Now, what is he talking about? Aristotle was the one who first said that the head is the seat of the reason and the belly is the seat of the passion. And so in Aristotle's understanding, to be a good person or a good citizen or a person of virtue, you had to have your head govern your belly, because if your passions govern your thinking, then you're going to be led down the wrong path. Lewis thought that you needed more than just some of the things that Aristotle offered to have the head govern the belly. He thought the head needed some help. It needed help from the chest. In other words, a formed moral conscience, what some people have called a moral imagination. Now, if all of this sounds kind of heady and dense and I've already lost you, here's what you do. Go back to Narnia, specifically the book, The Voyage of the Dawn Treader. This book has one of the best introductory lines of any book of Lewis's or any book that I've ever read. Here's how it goes. His name was Eustace Clarence Scrubbs, and he almost deserved it. It's a great way to begin a book. Who is Eustace Clarence Scrubbs? Well, he's the boy without a chest. And we know this because just like in Men Without Chest, where Lewis complains about the British educational system, we meet Eustace and immediately Lewis complains about the British educational system, which produced this snotty-nosed, grumpy kid named Eustace. Now, Eustace joins his cousins, Edmund and Lucy, as they get transported back to Narnia. They get sucked through this picture and they land in an ocean. Now, Lewis talks about how much Eustace knows about boats, but now Eustace finds himself in an ocean and he gets picked up by a Narnian ship. But Eustace doesn't know how to live on a boat. In other words, he knows lots of facts about boats, but he doesn't know actually how to live on a boat. He doesn't know what to do with the knowledge that he has. Eustace also, Lewis says, calls his parents by their first names because he doesn't understand authority. And most of all, Lewis says, Eustace doesn't know anything about dragons. And Lewis makes the comment, what are they teaching kids these days if they're not teaching them about dragons? And another place, Lewis explains that. He says that little kids need to know about dragons because they need to know that dragons actually exist, and they need to know that dragons can be beaten. But Eustace doesn't know anything about these dragons, and that's really unfortunate because he actually becomes one. In other words, his character gets so bad, the only thing he can actually become in Lewis's mind is a dragon. Now, juxtaposed in this book, beside Eustace, is another creature. He's a creature that's small, but he often is a little child's favorite character in the whole series. In fact, he's the favorite character of my kids. That's Reepicheep the mouse. Reepicheep, even though he's small, has a chest. In fact, he has the largest chest in Narnia. He does the right thing because it's the right thing, not whether it's going to be good for him or not. He protects women's honor because, you know, that's just what you do. And he'll fight a battle even if he knows he's going to lose it because, well, it's the right battle to fight. Now, Eustace and Reepicheep don't get along very well at the beginning, and that's often the case between someone with a chest and someone without a chest. Eustace thinks he can pick on the little Reepicheep because, you know, that's what he's used to doing in the real world. But that was a bad idea, because after he picks Eustace up and swings him around by his tail to pick on him, Eustace, who's a trained swordsman, hits the ground, pulls out his sword, and smacks Eustace around and scares him half to death. And even though Eustace now is scared of Reepicheep, Reepicheep starts investing in Eustace. He starts looking after Eustace. And once Eustace becomes a dragon, Reepicheep is the one that goes up the mountain every day to visit him, and they become actually very close friends. And interestingly, once Eustace is de-dragoned, in other words, he's freed from his dragon self by the great Aslan, when he takes his claws and rips away the flesh, Eustace, when he's a boy again, is now a boy with a chest. In that story, I think we see a lot of what Lewis believed took in order to cultivate the moral imagination or character and virtue. The first thing that Lewis points out is that knowing things is not the same thing as knowing the true, the good, and the beautiful. In other words, having an education of facts is not the same thing as being a wise person. To have a chest, we must know what is the good, the true, the beautiful. In other words, what is a life worth living? Secondly, Lewis teaches us in that story that the chest is something that has to be cultivated. It's a muscle. You can't just put it on, you have to exercise it. If we really want to be people who pursue the good, the true, and the beautiful, we have to be people who do good, true, and beautiful things. Lewis understands that life is this series of small steps and small decisions, and we end up getting to whatever destination, whether it's being a reepicheep or being a dragon, by the decisions we make on a day-to-day basis. In other words, good people make good decisions, and good decisions make good people better people. And that brings up the third thing that Lewis understands. You see, Eustace couldn't develop a chest all by himself. The first thing he needed was redemption. It's one of the great redemption scenes in all of Narnia, where Eustace is trying to free himself of being a dragon, and he jumps into a pool of water and he tries to wash off the scales, and the more the scales wash off, the more the scales are replaced by other scales, and he can't do it by himself. And so Aslan steps into the scene, and he takes his claws and he rips the flesh away and rips the flesh away, and that makes Eustace a new person. Lewis understood that we cannot be virtuous people in and of ourselves. We need to be made new by Jesus Christ. And as we know throughout the Narnian series, Aslan is the picture of Jesus Christ that Lewis wants us to see. But don't overlook the connection between Reepicheep and Eustace. You see, in order to become virtuous people, we need to actually walk with virtuous people. It's Reepicheep's investment in Eustace that starts to cultivate this chest, that brings him to this understanding of the life that he doesn't have and that he wants to have. And Reepicheep actually becomes someone who walks with Eustace through life. Chuck Colson used to say that there's no limit to the human capacity for self-rationalization. When we're left to our own, we justify our decisions. We justify our immorality. We justify our lack of virtue. It's when we have strong people that walk beside us that we can actually develop character and we can develop virtue, and we become those sort of people that pursue the true, the good, and the beautiful. As Proverbs says, if you want to be wise, you have to walk with the wise. You know, I always loved Abolition of Man, and specifically Men Without Chests. But when I really saw the Voyage of the Dawn Treader in light of the things that Lewis was trying to communicate, I understood what he was trying to say a whole lot better. So if you're ready to give up on Lewis, don't do it just yet. Go back to Narnia.